I will always remember my son's first day of school. Lucas was 5 years old, and he was going to kindergarten, and he was so excited. He was going to take the bus, and we were excited for him. And I'll never forget that day when I came home, I was eager to check in with him to hear how did it go. And Lucas's response was, "Dad, I'm tired of hearing about hallway procedures." I found his response both amusing and sad. Amusing because I thought, oh my gosh, you have a lifetime of hallway procedures that you're gonna have to work through. And also amusing because it captured so well how schools and institutions can just grind us down with their bureaucratic rules and monotonous procedures. But I found it sad because this was his first day of school, and his takeaway on that very first day was that school's boring. This is a boring place. However, he's gonna have to learn to deal with boredom. It's something we all learn to deal with. But boredom is not just a problem in schools, it's a problem that tracks us beyond schools. There are several troubling addictions that are linked to boredom. When we're bored, we drink too much, we eat too much, we spend too much money, we buy things we don't need. There are entire industries that are designed around making us bored. And so boredom has some really problematic behaviors linked to it, but even more than these troubling addictions, there are also these smaller things. The half listening to friends and acquaintances when we're bored, or just the way we idle our time when we're bored. I'm dating myself, but if I could take back the 10,000 hours I put into Tetris and put that into actually playing guitar, I'd be a professional musician right now. And boredom tends to objectify things and actually be quite judgmental and arrogant. That's a boring person, that's a boring book. But in truth, boredom is both objective and subjective. We're actually making a judgment call, deciding whether something is boring or not. And we know that what bores one person could actually be very interesting to another. So in this respect, boredom is kind of a curious and perplexing mood state. What do we make of it? It's kind of like a dashboard light when you're in your car and a light goes on and it gives you very clear directives. You need to get gas, you need to get oil, you need to put air in the tires. The problem with the boredom light is it goes on and there's no clear direction. We're not sure what to do with it. And most of the time, we don't even notice the boredom dashboard light because it's going on all the time. It's kind of blinking and it just becomes white noise and we're dealing with it. We're dealing with it without even realizing it. And we avoid boredom because it's actually painful. I don't know if you've ever felt the pain of boredom. The pain of boredom was illustrated in a recent study at the University of Virginia. They asked subjects to come into a room and just sit with their thoughts for 15 minutes. And these were folks that were 18 to 70. And they could do that, or they could put their finger in a machine and receive a painful shock. The results of the study were, pun intended, shocking. 30% of the women and 60% of the men chose to shock themselves rather than sit with their thoughts for 15 minutes. All of this is to say that we would rather have physical pain, many of us, than the pain of boredom. The first takeaway is that boredom should not be trusted. We tend to trust boredom. We make an implicit judgment about something or someone and decide it's boring. And it's arrogant, it's judgmental. And it often is wrong. We need to take a careful look and make sure that there might be something here worthwhile, worth attending to. So don't trust boredom is takeaway one. The second takeaway is we need to protect our attention. A bored mind is primed to get distracted from distraction by distraction. It is looking to be distracted. And we think about the things we care about, our friends, or something we're trying to get good at, or a hobby that we love. Each of these things will be afflicted by boredom. It will come. And if we are in an environment where we're easily distracted, boredom will get the better of us. Don't trust boredom, protect our attention. And then finally, we need to talk about boredom. We all have strategies that we employ. We need to name those strategies. There was a great writer in the 80s who described our modern life as a sophisticated boredom avoidance scheme. Walker Percy said that. The scheme is far more sophisticated today. We know that. But to the extent that we're not reflecting on it and thinking about it, boredom plays us and gets the better of us. But to the extent that we're reflecting on it and thinking about it, we can put boredom in its place and give our attention and protect our attention to those things we love and the people we care about. Thank you very much.
What first pops into your mind when you hear the word midlife? Crisis, yes. The dreaded midlife crisis. After I lost a few friends to midlife suicide, I decided to create an alternative narrative to the awful way we tend to think of our 40s, 50s, and 60s. And I'm going to share that with you over the next 3 minutes. Midlife is one of 3 life stages that sprouted in the 20th century. Adolescence didn't even exist until 1904, when society realized that just because you hit puberty didn't mean you were an adult. Retirement was popularized nearly a century ago with pensions and Social Security, and then 25 years later with the advent of AARP, I hope you have your card, and retirement communities. Those two life stages got a whole lot of love. But there's a life stage in the middle that didn't get much respect. Midlife is the natural outgrowth of the 3 decades of additional longevity we were granted in the 20th century. But all it got was a bad brand, the midlife crisis, which was coined in 1965. Yet research on how happiness evolves as we age shows that from about age 22 or 23 all the way to 45 to 50, there is a long, slow decline in life satisfaction. It bottoms out around 45 to 50, although your mileage may vary. On the other side of that, though, the good news is that from age 50 on, we get happier and happier. It's called the U-curve of happiness. So maybe there's a new framework to think about midlife, one that we learned when we were kids, the magical metamorphosis of the caterpillar to the butterfly.
So, I'm from Guatemala. This is a public service announcement. That is where Guatemala is. Also, that is not where they keep the prisoners. That is called Guantanamo. Not the same place. So, Guatemala is right below Mexico. And for the Americans in the audience, and let this sink in because it really applies in most ways. For the Americans in the audience, you can think of it as Mexico's Mexico. Just like the US doesn't want illegal immigration from Mexico, Mexico doesn't want illegal immigration from Guatemala. It's a smaller country, it's a poorer country, and, well, what can I tell you? It has much better Mexican food. Guatemala is a very poor country, and a lot of people talk about education as something that brings equality to different social classes. But I always saw it as the opposite, as something that brings inequality. Because what happens in practice is that people who have a lot of money can buy themselves a really good education and therefore continue having a lot of money, whereas people who don't have very much money barely learn how to read and write and therefore never make a lot of money, and this is especially true in poor countries. Now, I was fortunate that I received a rich person's education, even though I didn't grow up rich. And it's because I'm an only child, and my mother, who was a single mother, spent all of her resources on my education. And this allowed me to come to college to the US and eventually get a PhD in computer science. Now, because of all of this, about 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to do something that would give equal access to education to everyone. In the case of math, just knowledge of math does not increase your income potential, because usually you have to learn math to then learn physics, to then become a civil engineer, like that's how you make more money. Whereas with languages, if you were a waiter and you learn English, now you can be a waiter at a hotel and make more money. So we decided, well, let's get started by teaching languages. Now, we also convinced ourselves that the only way to really reach a lot of people was by using a mobile phone, or a smartphone in particular. See, building schools all over the world is simply too expensive. On the other hand, most of the world's population already has access to a smartphone, and the trend is that that fraction is only going to increase. So we decided at the time that we would make a way to learn foreign languages on a mobile phone that was accessible to everyone. And then we called it Duolingo. Thank you.
Growing up in Mississippi, my family never talked about money, but I could infer how much people had by pattern keeping at Christmas time. My Uncle Chip was always good for money, an absolute delight. J.C. Penney's, here I come. Mama Dear would always give us apples, oranges, butterscotch candy in a brown paper bag. It was a gift given with love, and it meant a lot coming from the matriarch of our family. Now, my parents would make sure my twin and I were fresh in the latest fashions. Jabot jeans, starter jackets. Looking good made us feel rich even if we weren't. When I got my first job post-graduate school, I was making $70,000. I was rich. But that shopping spree at J.C. Penney's was no longer gonna scratch that itch. I needed to do whatever I could to be legit wealthy. I was placed in a small white waiting room, and I stayed there for what felt like forever. Finally, a man came in who could not even bother to learn the correct pronunciation of my name and asked me what my goals were for the future. Okay, I'm excited again. I know the answer to this. Number one, I would like to retire comfortably by the age of 60. Number two, I would like to be able to take care of my mom. His response, I don't know why taking care of your mother is your responsibility. He then went on to speak in some financial jargon I could not understand. The entire interaction took me so aback that I vowed to share the bare minimum the rest of the meeting. I could not figure out what I was missing, but it made me question everything. Maybe I did not know what wealth was. Maybe wealth was not intended for people like me. Maybe I was reaching for too much.
Here is one way to begin to talk about what the pandemic, the post-2020 world, began to set in motion. And I want to share with you 3 arts of living that have persistently emerged, callings. Each of them carries practices towards what it might mean for each of us to participate as we move forward in the remaking of this world. The first is to see the generative story, the generative narrative of our time.
I do not suppose to know everything. And those closest to me, they might say, I don't really know much at all. But one thing that I know to be true, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is this. The surest way to fail in life is to set a goal. Now, unfortunately, I found this out through excruciating pain, but hopefully in the next 9 minutes, I can convince you too that this is true. Without the pain,
2,500 years ago, Heraclitus said, the world bubbles forth. Here's bubbling. What is actual now enables what is next possible, the adjacent possible. The biosphere has been bubbling forth for 4 billion years, creating new possibilities in the universe in that bubbling. It's critical that physics cannot talk at all about bubbling new bubbles. Even by existing organisms create new possibilities. If I'm a bacterium and you're a bacterium, and I have a flat surface, I'm a possible highway you can walk over to get food. That's bubbling forth. So 2.5 billion years after life started, 6 times multicellular organisms emerged. 1 billion years after that, 3.5 billion years after life started, is the extraordinary Cambrian explosion. 540 million years ago, for 50 million years, there was just this burst of creativity making all of the phyla that exists now, and now we have this guy. I'm scared of having him in bed, I really am. So I don't know what to call him, and it's a vote afterwards. So here's a gentler guy, and I'm in love with him. Look at his eyes looking at you, you know. You doing what? The function of a part is that subset of its causal properties that sustain the whole.
When I was a kid, the violin was the center of my life. I'd run home from the bus stop after school and practice for hours. Every Saturday, my mom and I would wake up at 4 a.m. to catch a train to New York so I could study at Juilliard. Here's a throwback to 8-year-old me performing the violin. Some questionable fashion choices from young Maya here, not gonna lie. But anyway, when I was a teenager, my musical idol, Itzhak Perlman, invited me to be his private student, and my big dream of becoming a concert violinist felt within reach. But then, one morning when I was 15, I was practicing this tricky technical passage. I struggled to get it right, and I overextended my finger on a single note. I heard a popping sound. I'd permanently damaged the tendons in my hand, and my dream was over. I share this story because unexpected change happens to all of us. An accident or an illness, a relationship that suddenly ends. Today, I'm not a violinist, but I'm a cognitive scientist, and I'm interested in how we respond to exactly this kind of change.
I am an endangered species. but I sing no victim song. I am a woman, I am an artist, and I know where my voice belongs. Now, you might have heard me sing that song. It was September 12th, 2022, right after Amy Poehler and Seth Meyers said, and the winner is Sheryl Lee Ralph. What? I had just won the Emmy Award for Best Supporting Actress in a Comedy for my role as Mrs. Barbara Howard on your favorite TV show, Abbott Elementary. Oh, yes. And I was shocked, as the children would say, shooketh, into disbelief. Oh my goodness, it was my first time at the Emmys, and I won! Yes! And I got to tell you, in that moment, I was so stunned into disbelief that I don't know how I got up on the stage. There I was, just listening to that roar of applause. And my whole career flashed right there in front of me, starting with 19-year-old Sheryl Lee in her first movie being directed by the great Sidney Poitier. Oh yeah, you can clap that. Followed by 10 years of no after no after no before the next film role came about. But I filled in that time with TV and more no's and more rejection until I made it big on Broadway in what has become the iconic musical of the 80s, because I say so, Dreamgirls. And boy, did I learn a lot of life lessons there. And I mean, after so many moments of doubt, disbelief, there I was on that Emmy stage with this huge sign in front of me flashing, "Stop now, stop now, stop now." And I started to think, my God, what if I had stopped after all of those no's? What if I had stopped after all of those moments of feeling defeated? What if I had stopped? I wouldn't be standing there for that golden moment. But right now, many of us, we are feeling deeply challenged, trying to hold on and believe in ourselves. And I do not mean in a toxic way. I am talking about a way that comes from confidence, the kind of confidence that can keep us moving forward when we are feeling like we are carrying the weight of the pandemic, trying to figure out all of this political division, fighting all of the mental, physical, social violence in our homes, in our communities, to climate change, social media. It's a lot, making it hard to believe in the goodness in the world, and harder still to believe in the goodness of ourselves. This is a rough time, people, and our mental health is suffering. We all need a checkup from the neck up. And I don't mean, yeah, it's okay, you feel me, thank you. And I don't mean just medicine. I actually mean reframing our thinking of our ability to believe in ourselves. Now, I know you see me on TV, in magazines, on movie screens, and you might be thinking to yourself, what does she know about struggling to believe in herself? Well, let me tell you something. I do not look like my journey.